Hello, friends, and welcome back to Malicious Compliance Stories. Let's start our video with a story in which our OP's peaceful mini farm turns into an absolute circus thanks to an entitled visitor. But before we begin, best way to support our channel is to leave comments, like, and subscribe with a turned-on bell so you don't miss the new video every single day. Here we go. Entitled Mom invites herself to my mini farm. I and my husband live on a rural 4-acre mini farm. My personal space is very important to me, and I consider my mini farm with all my lovely pets a sanctuary of sorts. I foot all the bills for the animals and do pretty much all of the caretaking. We have horses, goats, chickens, cats, and dogs, while my husband enjoys the occasional romp with his nephews, and he generally just tolerates all of my pets. Anything that distracts him from his primary hobbies of video games and D&D is off the table. We needed some professional handyman help as our house is quite old and we don't have enough time in the day to get all the little maintenance projects done and maintain our careers. One of my husband's employees volunteered her boyfriend as his side hustle as handyman work. We arranged a date and time for him to come out and quote us some work. She mentioned to my husband that he may need to bring his child along. When my husband mentioned this, I asked him how old the child was and if the child could be expected to behave, since our home is not exactly child-proof. If you touch our walls the wrong way, you can get bad splinters since it's all reclaimed wood. I've done it several times, and it sucks bad. My husband had this conversation with his employee, and I was assured the child was old enough to mind himself and all would be well. The night of the quote date, I was informed that my husband's employee would be coming along with her boyfriend to mind the child. I was quite confused because why wouldn't she just mind the child at their home and let her boyfriend come alone? I asked my husband this, and he said she wanted to see the horses. I asked him if he had actually invited her to come over, and he said no, she just basically announced she was coming. I told him she was rude and presumptuous, but whatever, let's just get it over with. They show up. There's not one child, there are two. She brought her kid as well, which I'm only just finding out about as the child rockets his high-energy ADHD 3-year-old self out of the van and proceeds to start noisily chasing my free-range chickens all over the front driveway. And her boyfriend brings his teenage brother as well as his 5-year-old, who proceeds to crawl all over my barn and rob me of all my free-range chicken eggs as the 3-year-old propels himself around the barnyard, screaming his head off, stripping off shoes and socks, bouncing off hay bales, and trying to chase all my goats down. This woman proceeds to pretty much ignore me as she sticks her hands and face all over my two lovely but very sensitive rescue horses. One is an ex-racehorse and the other was from an abusive home she was forcibly removed from. And talking at me the whole time about how awesome her friend's therapy horses are and pausing only to scream at her out-of-control child that she's alternately ignoring and somewhat attempting to discipline as he climbs my fencing and gets my friendly goats riled up to the point where they want to play headbutt with him, which would be super bad for him. One of my friendliest goats, who's definitely ready for playtime after all the excitement, walks over to the egg-thieving 5-year-old who was kinda just minding his own business and proceeds to headbutt him in the chest. Goat was playing, but the kid was tiny. The kid goes flying. The kid bursts into instant scared tears. He wasn't really hurt, it just scared him. And I'm left trying to figure out how to confront this little stranger that I've only just met 5 minutes ago. Super awkward for me. I'm not good at it. The woman that inflicted herself upon me is too busy chasing down and screaming at her demon spawn to be watching both kids, and at this point, I'm just completely bewildered and ready for this whole ordeal to be effing over. After the headbutt, I close up the barn and kick them out. The 3-year-old's just running around my yard like a little tornado, screaming his little head off, and the 5-year-old keeps coming up with broken chicken eggs in his pockets from when the goat knocked him over, probably. The whole thing was a GD3 ring circus that I did not sign up for, and I'm still kind of salty about it, even 3 days later. For the love of God, woman, if you're going to impose yourself on others uninvited, at least have the decency to get your kid in line first. Talk about effing entitled. Also, maybe go see your friend with the therapy horses and leave me and my farm out of it. Also, it's my house too, and I wanted to talk about the work being quoted, not play effing nanny tour guide. I don't run a effing petting zoo. Sounds like it's time to hire someone else. Someone who actually is professional about his work. And our second story. Receipt for the money, then the money. How about no? My grandfather was not a wealthy man by any stretch, but he worked hard for many years and was always very careful with money and invested wisely. He lived well in his retirement, and even so, when he passed, he left a trust fund in the low six figures. Per the terms of the trust, the interest earned by the fund was to be paid to his wife, my step-grandmother, for the remainder of her life. When she passed, the trust was to be distributed among his children and grandchildren by prescribed percentages, with all taxes and expenses paid by the trust itself. After my step-grandmother passed, I received a letter from the bank holding the trust notifying me that I was to receive a few $1,000s from the distribution of my grandfather's trust. They just required that I notarize the enclosed receipt, document, and mail it back. To be clear, the receipt document said something like, I hereby acknowledge receiving a check in the amount of $3,456.78 from Banco from the Phineas Q. McGillicuddy Trust. To be even more clear, they were asking me to notarize a statement saying I had already received the alleged check before they would even send it. I spoke to 3 notaries, 2 bank managers, and the district attorney. They all agreed they had never heard of such a thing. The DA said it wasn't illegal, but very strange. I called the bank and spoke to the woman handling the trust, bank lady, BL, saying I was not comfortable sending them a notarized document acknowledging the receipt of funds that I had not, in fact, received. She insisted, saying it was just their policy. Her logic was that if they were to send a check without having a receipt to prove that I had received it, they couldn't prove they had sent it. My logic was that if I sent them a receipt first and then the check never arrived for whatever reason, I'd be screwed because they would be holding a notarized document saying I had, in fact, received the check. We went round and round, and at one point I offered to drive 120 miles to receive the check in person, but then sign the receipt in front of her and her notary. BL said even if I were there in person, she would still require me to sign the receipt first before she would hand over the check. Eventually, I gave in. I had some unexpected expenses of my own at the time and really needed that money to fill in a hole before I fell in it, so I swallowed my pride and told my principals to get bent, sent BL her damn notarized receipt, got my check, and took care of my business. A few months later, I got another letter from BL. It seems they had overestimated certain taxes and distribution-related expenses, and as such, there was a second, much smaller distribution for each beneficiary. In my case, it was about $90. Again, all I had to do was get the enclosed receipt notarized, acknowledging that I had received a check in the amount of $87.65 from Banco from the Phineas Q. McGillicuddy Trust. With my financial hole filled in, I could afford to stand on principle over $90, and this time I stood my ground. I called BL and once again told her that I was not comfortable signing a receipt stating I had received a check that I had not, in fact, received. She insisted, said it was just their policy, and got quite short with me about it. I hung up, then called back and asked for the name of that lady's supervisor and for the highest-ranking person in charge at that location, who turned out to be the president of Banco. Sweet. I wrote a snail mail letter to BL, CC her supervisor, CC the president of Banco, borrowing language directly from their letter and receipt document. I required them to send me a notarized copy of the enclosed receipt, acknowledging that they had received my notarized receipt, acknowledging that I had received a check in the amount of $87.65, blah, blah, etc., etc. I said that upon receiving their notarized receipt, I would then send them my notarized receipt immediately. I said it was just my policy. I sent these letters via certified mail, return receipt requested. A few days later, I received the return receipts from the post office, documenting that all 3 letters had been delivered to their intended recipients. A few days after that, I received an envelope from BL containing the check for $87.65. No further comment from BL or anyone else at Banco. I love imagining some bigwig at Banco getting your letter and going, "Duh F?" Realizing what a stupid policy some idiot at his bank had implemented before calling down his wrath upon said idiot. And our last story. The neighbors used my property as a parking lot. I own a large house surrounded by an equally large piece of property. When I bought it 5 years ago, I enjoyed the isolation. It was at least a 5-minute drive to the nearest house. Over time, though, the surrounding villages and towns started to expand, and soon developers were building houses right next to my property. At first, I didn't mind. It wasn't like I could do anything about it, and my property was big enough that I could still feel like I had some distance from the new developments. Now here's where it got tricky. I had created a shortcut on my property, a simple dirt road with gravel that connected to the main road nearby. It saved me time instead of driving all the way around. For a while, no one noticed, but soon after people started moving into the new houses, they began using my road as well. And I wasn't just dealing with 1 or 2 cars, it became a regular thing. People were taking the shortcut like it was a public road, and kids started using my field to play football. At first, I didn't care too much. I wasn't really using the field, and it didn't bother me until it did. Within a few months, it escalated. What started as a few people using the road became a full-on parking lot. Whenever there was a party or gathering in the neighborhood, cars would flood my road and field. Some even set up shop like it was their personal parking area. Naturally, I tried to talk to them. The responses varied. Some were apologetic and moved their cars, while others told me to go F myself. After enough of those encounters, I'd had it. I began having cars towed whenever they parked on my property. That's when things turned ugly. People started shouting at me, and worse, they began targeting my girlfriend with their anger. She became the scapegoat, receiving verbal abuse whenever I wasn't around. That was the last straw. I decided to build a large stone fence around my entire property. It wasn't cheap, but at this point, I didn't care. I needed my space back, and I was done being a pushover. Once the fence went up, things shifted. People who had once been aggressive now came knocking on my door, apologetic and begging me to take it down. They were suddenly very sorry for using my property, especially now that they had to add 15 to 20 minutes to their commute to work without my shortcut. I wasn't having any of it. I told them to go F themselves and warned them that if I ever saw them on my property again, I'd be letting my dogs loose. It's been quiet since then. It's your private property. You were doing your nice neighbors a favor by letting them use your shortcut. You don't owe them the use of it. Hey guys, thank you all for watching the video. I'll see you in the next one.